Amen. So as I was thinking about this picture of Jesus transfigured, the Feast of the Transfiguration, I was reminded about a movie, a film I saw, 1987 it was made, called Area. And it was a film where 10 directors put together their favorite opera, 5 or 6 minute little clips. And there was one particular segment, and it was from Gustave Charpentier's opera Louise, Depuis le jour. And it was a very powerful image of an opera singer who was now in her 80s. And she's dancing in an 18th century period costume with a fan. And she's surrounded by confetti and light. And she's kind of doing her final bow. And as the song is progressing, we go into 8mm black and white film. And there's a young woman in her 20s. And she's running around a garden with a handsome young man, and then they're frolicking at the beach together in the ocean. And it's clearly about her memory. And it's this beautiful kind of celebration of luminosity that doesn't change with age. That she was illumined, and that this obviously her first love or her husband or something, this memory came back with her. And it was this beautiful. I'm going to put it on. It's on YouTube. So when we fire up the video from the sermon, I'll connect it so that you get to see it. It was made by Derek Jarman, who's no longer with us. But it's a beautiful 5-minute piece of this song that has this kind of light and memory and connection. And the Transfiguration is about that. It is about memory that comes back to the community. And Bindi's right, this passage from Peter isn't written by our Peter, but it's written at a time when the church is persecuted. And it's written at a time when the church is kind of getting off course. There is these false teachers, these being taken in by myths and stories. And so the Transfiguration is a kind of keel or an anchor for the community in a time of difficulty and stress, when the light of Christ, the light of humanity redeemed, shines through. And I know that there are occasions in our lives where we see people, sometimes someone who is dying that we love. There is a kind of luminosity we see in their faces. They're ready. They've seen a glimpse of something that's beyond, and they're okay. And so the Transfiguration story for the Christian community is it's an anchor. And Jesus is about to go off to Jerusalem. He has this moment on the mountain. He's praying. He is with Moses and Elijah. It's a very mystical experience. It is an experience that the people who witness it find it very difficult to talk about. It's not something they run down the mountain and say, oh, guess what we saw. They see something that they cannot comprehend. And it's only later they live into this vision of what this man was all about. And we have this connection between divine revelation and inanimate objects like cloth and flesh and blood. And it's almost mystical and shamanistic, like the magicians. And we often think about Elijah and Moses as the prophets of the word. They preach. But I want us to think differently about Elijah and Moses today, as that they're shamans. They are from the very ancient tradition of magicians who use objects to work their magic. If you think about Moses, he has this veil that he wears. It's a kind of mask that he wears because this connection with the divine is too overwhelming for people. So it's like the cloud kind of diffuses the mystery and the power of the revelation in the story. We know that Elijah is a healer. He has this gift of healing. He brings down fire from heaven upon the prophets of Baal and destroys them. And he also goes off to heaven in a chariot of fire, and his magic cloak, the mantle, falls onto Elisha, and the work continues. So there's a kind of shamanistic tradition in both Elijah and Moses that Jesus is also, that a lot of that is projected onto Jesus, the healer. And so I want us to kind of explore that today. There's a wonderful tradition. The Hebrew word for prophet is naveh, and that's related to the words to flow or to gush, the energy of God. And it's also linked to the word for hollow, which is havu. The prophet is both a channel of energy and also an empty space for God to dwell. I love that image. Deep Hollow Road will never quite have the same significance again. And in her book, Shamanism, Shirley Nicholson points to two roads in every main culture that describes the way of the shaman. There's the warrior road and the adventurer road. The warrior shaman sees the world as a dangerous place full of death and destruction and rejection and tyranny and annihilation. And the world is full of evil and chaotic spirits. The shaman will seek to increase his powers to the point where he is unconquerable by man or spirit. He becomes the one to help others overcome these forces, to protect them from the dangers of the world. We see this in cartoon stories as well all the time. This is a kind of quintessential way in which one warrior shaman is portrayed. The adventurer shaman is very different. They acknowledge that there are dangers in the world, but the world is not a dangerous place. The world is an exciting place to be made into something as one wills. Even danger serves the purpose to find courage, to overcome something, the hero's quest for something. And the adventurer seeks to create change and experience different things. It's interesting, in older cultures like in Hawaii, God gives fire not to destroy, but to cook food. There is no word in the Hawaiian culture for evil. Hinu means harmful. No matter how much harmful things there are in the world, it is not an evil world. The warrior and the adventurer shaman are displayed on the mountaintop quest in the persons of Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And Jesus doesn't reject the techniques of Moses or Elijah because he copies some of their techniques, but he rejects others to create his own path. It's interesting that people wanted him to be the warrior Messiah. They want him to be this warrior Messiah, and he's not the warrior Messiah. He's going to bring in God's kingdom of justice and peace through nonviolence. So this image of Jesus kind of illuminated, this difficult image, is with us. And it's with us to give us, to kind of ground us in, as we move through the world, whether we consider the world a place of adventure or a place of evil and something to be feared. The idea that God is in us, in one another, in flesh and blood, has always been a difficult concept for Christians. And even within 100 years of the experience of Jesus, this letter of Peter is reminding people it's very easy to forget the incarnation of God in Jesus. Within 100 years of the incarnation, you had a heresy called Gnosticism. Right? Gnosticism was all about, it doesn't matter what you believe or you are. It's all about what's in your head. The Gnostics were people who knew, they had inside information. And so Gnosticism was a heresy that, again, it's not just about knowledge, it's about who you are, the sacredness of God in flesh and blood. There was also a heresy called Arianism within the first 300-400 years of the Christian story. And Arianism, the heresy was that Jesus wasn't really a man. He only looked like a man. And so we had a problem, again, considering that Jesus was real flesh and blood. And Athanasius, we have the Athanasian Creed, was the theologian that, again, brought us back to what the incarnation was really all about, how important that was to keep us on this track. And then in the 5th and 6th century, you had St. Augustine. And St. Augustine did a lot of damage to the theology of incarnation, particularly around issues of sexuality, that the flesh was corrupt and evil. There were whole debates about if you had sex on Saturday night, could you have communion on Sunday morning in church? Because it was kind of a mortal sin. And that attitude to this disconnect between the sacredness of the body and a kind of dysfunctional incarnational theology is still with us, right? There was a movement in the middle of the 19th century in England, and it came out of the incarnation, a kind of reconnection with the incarnation, and it was about how the good news, how the sacredness of God in human beings is displayed in industrial England. And people were working 14, 16 hours a day in horrible mills, horrible conditions. People were dying young of diseases. And there was a movement in the Church of England called the Tractarian movement. Clergy, because they believed in the sacredness of human beings, went into these communities and they built beautiful churches. They built places that were full of stained glass windows and color. And the Church of England, instead of wearing black and white, started to wear colored vestments and have candles and light. And it was bringing the beauty of creation into some of England's darkest places. And it was a movement called the Tractarian movement because a lot of the evangelism was done through giving out tracts. This building was built around that time. And it is very much in the tradition of the Tractarian movement, the color, and there are stories that underneath this white paint, there may be very decorative walls. I don't know if any of you were around, but somebody told me in the 60s this was painted out. And if you could imagine William Morris wallpaper, there was animals and flowers. That's about this period. It's about how beauty and God is incarnated in beauty in buildings. And St. Peter's would have been influenced by, David's nodding, by an incarnational theology. And it was a kind of rejection of that kind of black and white, Puritan, no symbolism. It's all about we're in our heads or we're in our souls. The soul is more important than the body. And so this image of Jesus being full of the radiance of God is a profound reminder of how God is in us and around us and in our neighbor. It's very easy in the church to get off that. You know, I would say the heresy of our modern day is the heresy of prosperity gospel, which is all over the world right now. Came from this country. It's basically consumerism with a religious veneer on it. That if you're rich, God is blessing you. And if you're poor, you must be doing something wrong. And that's all over the world right now. And again, it's not paying respect to how God is incarnate in all of us. This week I was doing a little bit of work on Walt Whitman. And here's another. Whitman is a kind of modern 19th century shaman. He's the adventurer shaman. And you think about, we think about New York as this crazy place, and we look around on our televisions, immigration, and the world is going to hell in a handbasket. The middle of the 19th century in New York City was a crazy time in the history of this country. You had thousands of refugees pouring in here, the famine in Ireland. You had people who were coming from war-torn zones and coming with enormous baggage, and they were landing in Manhattan, and they were trying to make their way. And there would have been disease and violence. It was a very, very frightening time in the history of New York. But it was interesting in the middle of that a poet, Walt Whitman, writes Leaves of Grass. And he sees something vibrating in this new creation that's happening in his day. And it was very radical. And it was about the equality that in all of these people, in all of this energy, something divine was happening. Broadway, the women, the shops and the shows, 1 million people, men as free, as superb open voices, hospitality. The most courageous and friendly young man, a city of hurried and sparkling waters, a city of spires hosted in bays, my city. And it's a vision that we are still living into. It's a vision of energy that was not only about the shaping of Manhattan and New York, but it was for the country, America, and for the world. It's an awesome vision. And he said this, that the job of the poet, Whitman says, is to resolve all tongues into his own, to be the joiner, to see how they join what brought them together rather than what separates them. The job of the poet is to be the joiner, to see how they join what brought them together rather than what separates them. And he went on to say that the duty of the poet is to cheer up slaves and horrify despots. Right. Boy. So that's a vision. It's kind of like the transfiguration, It's about a reminder of what is before us. This week, Mila and I ended up in the middle of Times Square. We wanted to play tourist. We live very close there in the city. And it was really amazing sitting on those red steps about 11 o'clock at night and watching. It was like a cathedral of people. And you have all the lights in the media. A young man proposed to his fiancée right there, and instantly photographs and cameras and everybody. It was this moment. But you get this sense of the mass of humanity making our way, loving and creating and committing. And for many people, being at Times Square, it's a lifetime dream to be right here in the center of this dream, of this moment of transfiguration. So I want us to just celebrate what that's all about. And the idea that the shamanistic tradition of Elijah and Moses and Jesus are with us as we bring our own magic to transforming and living into this vision. I'm going to end with the translation of the song that I began with, Depuis le jour. Everything is vibrant, everything rejoices at my triumph. All around me, everything is smiling light and joy, and I'm trembling delightfully from the charming memory of the first day of love. What a beautiful life. Oh, I'm so happy, utterly happy, and I'm trembling delightfully from the charming memory of the first day of love. Amen.